The night had started like any other inside the large control hall of the Global Space Council. The room always carried a faint smell of electronics and strong coffee, and the low humming of machines never stopped. Screens covered the walls, glowing softly in the dim light. People walked around with tired faces, checking data, adjusting controls, and updating reports. Most nights were calm here. Most nights felt predictable. But this one didn't. A young analyst sat near the back of the hall, staring at numbers on his monitor. He rubbed his eyes, thinking the long shift was making him see things. The gravitational readings coming from Earth didn't look right. They were not huge changes, just tiny shifts. So small that most people would ignore them. But he had a habit of noticing things that didn't fit, even the smallest details. He checked again. The numbers still looked strange. He raised his hand and called one of the senior officers. The officer walked over slowly, holding a cup of coffee and looking half awake. The analyst explained what he was seeing, but the officer simply smiled tiredly. "Probably a calibration glitch," he said. "Happens all the time." "Reset the panel." The analyst nodded politely, but something inside him felt uneasy. He had seen glitches before, but this didn't look like one. Still, he restarted the system as instructed. For a moment, everything seemed normal again. The numbers settled. The screen looked clean, but only for a moment. Not even a minute later, the readings jumped again this time, a little stronger. A quiet nervousness grew inside him. He tried not to show it. He checked the satellite logs, the communication feed, and the error reports. Everything looked fine. No system failure. No malfunction. No damaged satellite. Nothing made sense. Across the hall, a group of scientists were discussing weather data. Others were monitoring space traffic. Everyone was busy with their own work, unaware of the small ripple of fear starting to form at the corner of the room. The analyst took a deep breath and walked toward another officer, who was known for taking unusual cases seriously. He showed her the data. She frowned, went silent for a moment, then typed quickly on her tablet to check related sources. When she saw similar patterns from multiple satellites, her face changed. "This shouldn't be happening," she whispered. She didn't say it loudly. She didn't shout. But fear has a way of spreading even without volume. Something in her tone made the analyst's stomach drop. Within minutes, she called 2 more specialists over. Soon, the quiet corner became crowded. The numbers kept shifting, growing slightly each time, still small, still subtle. But undeniably real. Someone finally said what everyone was thinking. Earth's gravitational balance is moving. The room didn't explode into panic. It didn't need to. The silence was enough. A silence that felt heavier than anything they had ever felt before. More officers gathered. More screens were pulled up. More calculations were checked. If even one source suggested an error, they could relax. But every reading matched another. Every device confirmed the same thing. Something around Earth was changing. A senior scientist stepped forward and ordered the room to stay calm and follow protocol. He spoke with authority, but even he kept glancing nervously at the shifting numbers. People began working faster. Calls were made to nearby observatories. Data requests shot out to different space agencies around the world. Messages came back quickly. Everyone was seeing the same anomalies. The council members sitting at the higher level of the room started paying attention. One of them leaned forward, watching the streams of data on the main screen. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand the situation before making any mistakes. Then, just after 1:30 a.m., the communication station received the first alarming message. 2 satellites had experienced sudden signal delays when sending information to Earth. Nothing major, just milliseconds. But those milliseconds meant distance. Another message came. A weather satellite showed cloud patterns that seemed slightly displaced, almost as if Earth's rotation or position had shifted a tiny bit. People tried to explain it scientifically. It could be atmospheric interference. It could be misalignment. It could be anything normal. But everyone in the room already felt it wasn't normal. Around 2 a.m., things escalated. A sudden alert flashed across the room. One of the orbital tracking systems had detected a measurable coordinate shift. Earth was not in the exact position it should be in that moment. At first, someone joked. Maybe Earth decided to move without telling us. No one laughed. By now, almost the entire hall was awake, alert, restless. Phone lines buzzed, keyboards clicked rapidly, and the big screens displayed a mix of maps, numbers, and gravitational charts. Someone brought in hot tea, but no one drank it. At 2:40 a.m., a senior astronomer ran into the room with printouts. Her face was pale. She had double-checked her calculations 3 times, hoping each time she was wrong. But she wasn't. She placed the paper on the council's main table and simply said, "The Earth's orbit is drifting." No one spoke for a full 5 seconds. By how much? One council member finally asked. "Not much," she answered, "but enough that we cannot explain. Enough that we cannot ignore." A wave of cold fear spread silently through the hall. In space-related science, even the smallest change could mean disaster. And these changes were not small anymore. They were becoming more noticeable with each passing hour. Suddenly, more data appeared. Tidal movements had begun to fluctuate. A few coastal sensors reported unexpected shifts in water pressure. The public didn't know yet, but the council did, and they were scared. At 3 a.m., the council declared a level 1 internal alert. All global observatories were contacted at once. The world's most experienced astronomers were woken up from their homes. Emergency protocols were prepared, just in case the situation turned into something bigger. Meanwhile, the analyst who first noticed the anomaly sat quietly at his desk, overwhelmed. He never imagined something he found would lead to this. He felt the weight of responsibility, even though none of this was his fault. The hall became louder as more information poured in. Monitors kept flashing updates. People shouted instructions. Others ran between stations. And then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., everything changed. Every sensor, every satellite, every tracking device showed a sudden, synchronized shift. Earth's orbital position jumped again, but this time it moved more than before. Enough to remove all doubt. Earth had changed position. It was real. It was undeniable. The room froze. No one typed. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if time had stopped inside the control hall. For a moment, people felt disconnected from reality. The idea was too big, too shocking, too impossible. Finally, someone whispered, "Why? What is causing this?" No one had an answer. A quiet panic began growing inside everyone. The kind of fear that does not scream, but sits deeply in the heart. A meeting of the top council members was called immediately. They gathered behind closed glass walls, while the rest of the hall watched helplessly. Their faces looked tense. Some looked confused. Others looked like they were trying not to think about the worst possibilities. While the meeting continued, the atmosphere outside grew heavier. People whispered to each other, trying to calm themselves. But no one could escape the truth written clearly on every screen. Earth was moving, and not for a scientific reason they understood. The analyst stood near the window, staring at the faint glow of the moon. He wondered if people sleeping in their homes had any idea what was happening. The world looked peaceful on the outside, but inside this hall, a storm had already started. The senior scientist who had earlier tried to keep everyone calm now looked worried himself. He walked around the room checking screens, but his face showed he wasn't calm anymore. When the council members finally stepped out of the meeting room, The entire hall turned quiet. Everyone waited to hear what they would say. One of them looked around and spoke in a steady voice, though fear was clear in his eyes. We must prepare for the possibility that this is not a natural event. The words cut through the air like a knife. People felt their hearts sink. Earth had moved, and something or someone had caused it. No one knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain. The night that started like any other had now become a night the world would never forget. The council room was tense. The world outside continued its quiet, sleeping rhythm, unaware that something impossible had already begun. Inside, the top leaders, scientists, and space experts gathered around massive screens and holograms, their eyes wide and alert. The numbers, the charts, the readings, they all said the same thing. Earth had shifted. Not by chance, not by accident. Something had moved it. The first reaction was disbelief. A few council members tried to suggest that the readings were wrong, that perhaps some glitch or misalignment had caused this panic. But every instrument, every satellite, and every observatory around the globe confirmed it. There was no denying it. Earth had moved, and no one knew why. What could possibly move an entire planet? Someone whispered. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The room was full of experts who spent their lives studying space, gravity, and the universe, and none of them had an answer. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise could have been. The analysts and scientists worked quickly, trying to make sense of the impossible. They rechecked all the data. They recalculated Earth's new position. The readings were consistent, undeniable, terrifying. Small but measurable shifts in orbit, gravitational patterns, and atmospheric balance. Enough to destabilize satellites, confuse astronomical predictions, and shake the confidence of anyone who studied space. Meanwhile, outside the council, normal life went on. People drove to work, slept, or watched the late-night shows, completely unaware that their planet had moved. No storm, no flash, no loud bang had marked the event. Earth had shifted without warning, without noise, without notice. It was almost poetic and almost terrifying. Back inside the council, the top leaders debated the situation. Should they announce it to the public? Should they keep it secret until they understood what was happening? Some argued that panic could be worse than the unknown itself. Others believed the people had a right to know that their home had been moved. The discussion grew heated, though no one really had a solution. There was nothing they could do, at least, nothing that they could see. One scientist pulled up live images from a satellite that monitored weather patterns. At first glance, it seemed normal. Clouds, oceans, continents, they were all there. But something was off. The patterns of cloud movement didn't match the expected rotation. Ocean currents were slightly misaligned. Even minor shifts in tidal patterns were detected. Every anomaly was small, almost invisible, but together they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. As they studied, more reports arrived. Coastal sensors showed unusual tidal fluctuations. Atmospheric sensors detected minute changes in air pressure and temperature distribution. Even magnetic field readings were slightly irregular. The council realized that the consequences of Earth's movement could ripple in ways they couldn't predict. Every system they depended on, every instrument calibrated for precise measurement, was now uncertain. The question on everyone's mind was simple and horrifying. Who or what had done this? Some council members suggested natural phenomena. Perhaps a large asteroid, a gravitational anomaly, or a previously unknown cosmic force. But the patterns didn't match anything natural. No external mass could have moved Earth in such a precise, controlled way. It didn't make sense. Then came a chilling thought. If it wasn't natural, if it wasn't accidental, then it had to be intentional. Someone or something had deliberately moved Earth. The room fell silent again, this time from fear rather than disbelief. The council decided to take immediate action. They opened communications with every space agency worldwide, from the largest observatories to the smallest research stations. Every possible sensor, every satellite, every telescope was focused on Earth. For the first time in history, the world's top minds were united in a single purpose: to understand what had happened to their planet. The data streamed in faster than anyone could process. At first, it was overwhelming. Each satellite offered slightly different readings. Each observatory captured slightly different images. Analysts worked in shifts, checking calculations, verifying reports, comparing notes. But the more they looked, the more impossible the truth became. Earth was not only moved, it seemed almost prepared, almost like it had been handled carefully, not destroyed or damaged. The first signs of panic started to appear among some council members. They were trained to stay calm under pressure, but this was not a situation that training could prepare them for. A few admitted to feeling dizzy or short of breath. Others clenched their hands into fists or pressed their palms to their faces. The fear was subtle, quiet, and internal, but it was real. They were looking at a planet they thought they understood, and now it was no longer theirs in any sense they could comprehend. Meanwhile, the analysts noticed something strange in the signals coming from space. Not signals from satellites or instruments, but something else. A faint, repeating pulse. Subtle, almost imperceptible. At first, they thought it was interference, some electronic glitch. But it persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, and it seemed to originate from the area around Earth itself. A senior physicist examined the pulse with specialized equipment. His hands trembled slightly as he analyzed it. "This isn't random," he said quietly. "It's structured. It's deliberate. Someone or something is sending a pattern." The news shocked the room. For hours, they had struggled with disbelief. Now the possibility of intelligence behind Earth's movement was on the table. The thought of an unknown force capable of moving a planet in silence, and now trying to communicate in some cryptic way, was terrifying. The council tried to interpret the pulses. The patterns were unlike any human code. No language they knew, no mathematical pattern familiar to earthly science. It was as if someone or something was using a completely alien logic, one that humans had never seen before. As the morning approached, the first news alerts started reaching the public, but no one fully understood what to report. Scientists tried to release statements, but every explanation sounded impossible. Headlines hinted at strange cosmic anomaly or Earth orbit irregularities, but the full truth was too complex and frightening for immediate disclosure. Inside the council, exhaustion began to show. Analysts and scientists had been awake for over 24 hours. Coffee cups piled up on tables. People rubbed their eyes, stretched, or leaned back in chairs, but the fear did not fade. They could see the data, but they could not see the reason behind it. One of the younger analysts, who had first noticed the movement, finally spoke up. "We need to be realistic," he said. "If this is deliberate, if someone moved Earth, then we have to accept that they are far beyond anything we can imagine. We're not just behind, they are capable of anything." The council listened quietly. The words sank in. A planet moved in silence. Unknown forces at work, humanity completely powerless to stop it. The fear was not about destruction. It was about realization. For the first time, they understood that the universe was bigger than any plan they had ever made, and more dangerous than any disaster they could imagine. By mid-morning, the world outside began to stir. Astronomers and scientists across the globe noticed discrepancies in their readings. Satellites experienced unusual orbits. Clocks based on Earth's rotation were slightly off. Radio signals from space were interrupted. Small anomalies were noticed by observant civilians. Unusual tides, slightly shifted shadows, and flickers in satellite imagery online. The council debated releasing the full truth, but they knew it would cause panic. Instead, they decided to continue monitoring, studying, and preparing. They needed to understand the movement, and if it was intentional, they needed to prepare for whatever came next. The hours passed slowly. Analysts worked in silence, side by side. The young analyst who first noticed the anomaly stared at the monitors, a sense of dread settling in. He wondered how long it would take for humanity to realize that their home planet could move without warning. The council held emergency meetings throughout the day. Every theory, every hypothesis, every possible cause was considered. None made sense. No solution was available. Fear was growing, not just for themselves, but for the entire world. By evening, a quiet consensus had formed. Earth had moved. Something powerful and unknown had done it. Humanity had no control over the situation, and the fear that had begun in a quiet corner of a control hall had now spread to the minds of the world's most intelligent and capable people. They were left with a single, terrifying truth. Earth's movement had happened. They could not reverse it. They could not explain it. They could only watch, calculate, and wait for what might come next. And in that moment, the council realized that fear is not always about what is happening to you. It is about understanding how powerless you truly are. The council's control hall had turned into a quiet battlefield of minds. Everyone worked quickly, almost mechanically, but the fear in the room was impossible to hide. They had finally accepted the undeniable truth. Earth had moved, and it was deliberate. That alone was enough to shake even the most experienced scientists and leaders. But what came next would make them realize that this event was far bigger than they could have imagined. It started subtly. Satellites that had been quietly observing Earth for decades began to capture unusual shapes and energy patterns near the planet. At first, no one thought much of it. Space is vast, and strange things appear all the time: cosmic dust, solar flares, radiation bursts. But this was different. These readings didn't match anything natural. The energy was too structured, too rhythmic. One of the senior astrophysicists ran the data through every system they had. He zoomed in, analyzed each signal, and compared it with historical readings. Every instrument confirmed the same thing. Earth had been surrounded by a massive energy field during the shift. It wasn't visible from Earth itself, and it didn't emit light like a star or heat like a planet. It was subtle, almost invisible, but powerful. The analysts stared at the screens, their faces pale. They had studied space anomalies for years, but nothing like this had ever been recorded. One whispered under his breath, "It's as if something is watching us." The words made everyone stop. The room became unnervingly quiet. No one spoke, but each person could feel the weight of that possibility. Someone had moved Earth, and now something or someone was observing it. The council immediately activated every long-range sensor and telescope they could access. They scanned the area around Earth, looking for anything familiar. Nothing. No spacecraft, no asteroid, no known object. Just the faint, shimmering energy field. But there was something more. Subtle fluctuations in the field, almost like pulses, almost like signals. A young data analyst began decoding the pulses. At first, it seemed like random noise, but patterns emerged. The pulses repeated with exact timing intervals. They weren't random. They weren't natural. They were deliberate. "Someone is sending a message," he said quietly, almost afraid of being overheard. "But I can't understand it." The council leaned in. Fear and curiosity mixed into a heavy electric tension. The idea that an unknown intelligence was communicating or at least observing, was terrifying. The world's most brilliant minds had never faced anything like this. It wasn't an asteroid strike, a solar flare, or a black hole. This was something intentional, intelligent, and beyond anything they could fight or negotiate with. As the hours passed, more anomalies were detected. Electromagnetic fluctuations around Earth became measurable. Satellites experienced tiny, unexplained deviations in their paths. Even the International Space Station reported subtle shifts in gravity. Instruments detected changes in Earth's magnetic field, just enough to disturb sensitive electronics. The Council realized that whatever had moved, Earth was not only powerful, but precise. It didn't destroy. It didn't harm. It simply moved the planet, observed it, and seemed to be testing reactions. The fear in the room evolved. At first, it was disbelief. Then it became awe. Now, it became something deeper. The fear of being completely powerless in the face of something incomprehensible. A senior scientist stood and addressed the room. We are dealing with an intelligence far beyond us. Not a civilization like ours, not a human-level entity. Something we cannot imagine. It moved our planet without resistance, without warning, and now it watches. We must understand that we are not in control here. No one argued. The truth was clear, and it was terrifying. They were on the edge of human knowledge, facing an intelligence they could not measure, communicate with, or hope to fight. Meanwhile, outside the council hall, the effects of Earth's shift began to appear subtly in daily life. Tides along coasts fluctuated unpredictably, confusing scientists who had not yet been brought into the Council's inner circle. Magnetic compasses experienced minor variations, enough to annoy sailors and pilots. Even satellites used for navigation and communication experienced brief delays. People on Earth noticed these anomalies, though they had no idea of the true reason behind them. Back in the Council, a team of astrophysicists decided to try a different approach. If this intelligence was observing, maybe it was also sending signals that could be decoded. They gathered every pulse reading, every magnetic fluctuation, every subtle anomaly, and began analyzing them mathematically. The room filled with soft hums of computers and quiet mutters of calculations. Hours passed, and slowly, a pattern emerged. It was not a language they could read, not mathematics they could immediately comprehend. It was something else entirely. A sequence of frequencies and harmonics that repeated in an almost musical pattern. It was as if Earth itself was singing, but in a song they could not understand. The realization sent chills down the spines of everyone present. Whatever had moved Earth, it had the capacity to communicate in ways that were beyond human comprehension. It was not a threat in the traditional sense, but the knowledge of being observed, of being judged, of being understood and measured. It was overwhelming. The young analyst who first noticed the pulses tried to explain. It's like it knows us. It understands what we are, not just our planet, but our civilization. And it's, I don't know, testing us. The Council fell silent again. The weight of his words hung in the room. Testing, observing, judging. The idea that an intelligence capable of moving an entire planet could also be evaluating humanity was beyond frightening. For the first time, they understood a larger truth. Humanity had always assumed that Earth was safe, predictable, and within their understanding. That illusion had ended in a single silent movement. And the silent observers outside the planet were a constant reminder that control had never truly existed. As the day progressed, the team attempted to make contact. Not through words, not through conventional signals, but by sending controlled pulses back into space, trying to mimic the patterns they had observed. It was experimental, risky, and based entirely on guesswork. Hours later, the same pulses returned, but slightly altered. Not words, not a clear reply, but something that suggested awareness. Something that suggested intelligence. The council realized that this was not a simple anomaly or a random cosmic event. This was an interaction, a dialogue beyond language, and Earth was the medium. The planet itself had become part of a message, a signal, a communication that humans could barely perceive. Fear turned into a mixture of awe and terror. Scientists who had spent years studying the cosmos suddenly felt small, insignificant, and fragile. Leaders who had commanded armies and economies felt powerless. Humanity was being confronted with forces far beyond its comprehension. By evening, the council called for a global observation network. Every observatory, every telescope, every satellite and probe that could collect data was asked to focus on Earth. Reports streamed in from around the world. Each confirmed the same thing. Subtle, structured pulses, energy fields surrounding the planet. Tiny shifts in gravity and magnetism, and the unmistakable sense that Earth was being observed. A senior official spoke quietly to the room. This is no longer just about movement. This is about awareness. We are not alone, and whatever is out there, it knows us. No one spoke. No one disagreed. The realization was too heavy. Humanity had long looked at the stars with wonder, imagining other life, other worlds. But now, the stars were watching back, and the watchers were far beyond human understanding. The young analyst, still staring at the screens, felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. "It's not attacking," he said softly, "but it's testing watching. And we can't even begin to guess why." The council nodded. That thought hung over everyone like a storm cloud. Humanity had never faced this. They had never encountered intelligence capable of moving their entire planet and observing them in ways they could not understand. Outside the council hall, Earth continued its quiet rotation. Oceans swirled, clouds drifted, and cities went about their routines, unaware that the very planet beneath them had been observed, measured, and shifted by forces far beyond their understanding. And yet, inside the council hall, the most powerful minds on the planet stared at screens, grappling with the impossible truth. Earth was being watched, and the watchers were far smarter and stronger than anything they had ever faced. The night ended with a single, heavy thought. Humanity had always believed it controlled its destiny, understood its world, and measured the cosmos. That belief was gone. And now, the council knew what true fear meant, not the fear of destruction, but the fear of being completely powerless in the presence of something incomprehensible. The council had spent hours watching, calculating, and trying to understand, but the more they studied, the less control they felt. Earth had moved, and the mysterious intelligence that had shifted, it seemed to be watching, judging, and communicating in ways humans could not fully grasp. Fear was no longer a quiet feeling in the back of their minds. It was sharp, active, and all-encompassing. Every thought, every decision seemed small in comparison to what they were facing. By morning, the council decided they could no longer remain passive. If the planet had been moved, they needed to know why. If it was being observed, they needed to communicate, or at least try. A global strategy meeting was convened, pulling in the world's top scientists, engineers, and leaders. They gathered in a room filled with screens, holograms, and data feeds. Everyone was tense, and the air smelled faintly of coffee, fear, and exhaustion. The first question was simple, but impossible to answer. How could humans even attempt communication with a force that had moved a planet? Traditional radio signals, lasers, satellites, everything they tried so far had yielded nothing more than a faint rhythmic pulse. No language, no words, no instructions, just observation. One scientist spoke cautiously. "We can't assume it even understands us the way we understand each other. If it's intelligent, it might perceive time, space, and matter in ways we cannot even imagine. The council nodded. That realization hung over them like a dark cloud. Humanity had spent centuries exploring space, reaching the moon, sending probes to other planets. And yet all of that seemed meaningless in the face of an intelligence that could handle an entire planet like an object. They decided to attempt a controlled response. Carefully calibrated signals were prepared. They were not words, not greetings, not messages of any kind humans would recognize. They were sequences of pulses designed to mimic the rhythmic patterns the observers had sent. The hope was not to communicate directly, but to show presence. Humanity was here, aware, and willing to respond. As the first pulses were sent, everyone in the council held their breath. Screens flickered, satellites blinked, instruments measured energy fields. Nothing happened immediately. Minutes passed. Hours passed. Anxiety grew. Some people tapped their fingers nervously on desks. Others sat frozen, staring at the data. Then something changed. The pulses returned, but altered, slightly. Not random, not chaotic, but deliberately modified. It was a response. The council erupted into quiet excitement mixed with fear. They were being observed, yes, but they were also being acknowledged. A young analyst whispered, almost to himself, "It's responding. It's actually responding." The senior scientist nodded slowly. "Yes, but we still don't understand how or why." The room went quiet again. The thrill of contact was tempered by the weight of the unknown. Humanity was now in a conversation it could not fully understand, with a force far beyond its comprehension. Every expert present felt the same mixture of awe and terror. As the council monitored the pulses, subtle changes in Earth itself were detected. Small gravitational fluctuations spread across the planet, affecting satellites, ocean tides, and magnetic fields. Instruments on the ground detected minute energy variations. Nothing destructive, but clearly deliberate. Every change was precise, controlled, almost like a warning. "We can affect you if we choose." The council debated what this meant. Was the intelligence testing humanity? Was it evaluating Earth's defenses, observing reactions, or trying to teach a lesson? The possibilities were endless, but none provided comfort. One leader said quietly, "We are not in charge here. Not of Earth, not of ourselves, not of anything. We can only respond and hope that our responses are acceptable." Fear mixed with determination. The council recognized that even if they could not understand the force, they could still act. They began to prepare probes, satellites, and instruments for closer observation, trying to map the energy field and detect its purpose. Every measurement was meticulous, every calculation precise. One mistake could alter results, or worse, provoke an unknown reaction. As preparations continued, a subtle panic began to spread among some council members. Not everyone reacted calmly. Some paced, their faces pale and drawn. Others muttered nervously under their breath. Even leaders who had faced wars, disasters, and crises felt powerless. Humanity's dominance over its planet was an illusion, and it was gone. Outside the council, the first signs of public awareness began to surface. Coastal sensors reported unusual tides. Some early warning systems showed minor deviations in natural patterns. Scientists around the world tried to analyze the data, but without the central coordination of the council, conclusions were slow. Social media quietly buzzed with speculation: strange weather, unusual satellite readings, rumors of anomalies, but no one could know the full truth. Back in the council hall, a senior physicist suggested a radical approach. We can't just send signals. We need to show presence in other ways. Energy fields, gravitational pulses, controlled emissions. We need to make Earth itself a signal. Perhaps then it will understand us better. The idea was risky. Manipulating energy at such a scale could have unintended consequences. But fear and determination outweighed hesitation. Teams began working on ways to make Earth itself respond to the signals through magnetic fields, satellite emissions, and controlled energy manipulations. Every step was measured. Every calculation double-dash checked dot as they worked. The pulses from the observers continued. They varied slightly with each iteration, almost like a heartbeat. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. The pattern seemed to respond to humanity's attempts, but in ways no one could fully predict. The Council realized something terrifying. They were learning slowly, step by step, while the observers had knowledge far beyond their own. It was a silent lesson in humility. Humanity was no longer the master of its planet. It was a student in a classroom it had never signed up for, with a teacher it could barely comprehend. Hours passed. Days, in some cases. The Council began to understand the rhythm of the pulses, though not their meaning. They noticed patterns, shifts when energy was emitted, pauses after signals were sent, subtle variations when instruments were moved. It was as if the intelligence was teaching them, not in words, but in action. Meanwhile, the analysts and scientists grew more united. Fear still lingered, but determination replaced some of the despair. If the observers were testing humanity, then humanity could at least try to understand. They began to work in shifts around the clock, mapping the pulses, analyzing energy fields, and trying to predict the next variation. Even as they did, the Council could not ignore the subtle danger. Every fluctuation in the energy field around Earth could potentially disrupt satellites, electrical grids, and communication systems. Humanity was at the mercy of forces it could not control, and every calculation carried weight. One wrong move could trigger consequences that no one could predict. The young analyst who first noticed the pulses stayed awake for hours, staring at the data. He thought about the billions of people living on Earth, unaware of how fragile their existence had become. He thought about the powerlessness of the Council, the scientists, and the leaders. And he thought about the intelligence watching, observing, and judging silently from the vastness of space. By evening, the Council had established a plan. Observation, response, and careful adaptation would be the core strategy. They would continue to monitor the energy fields, refine their signals, and prepare probes to explore the anomalies further. Every decision would be calculated, every response deliberate. And yet, despite their meticulous planning, one truth remained. They were still powerless. Humanity could send pulses, manipulate energy fields, and prepare instruments, but the observers controlled the situation. The planet had been moved. Earth was no longer fully theirs. The Council members finally allowed themselves a brief moment of reflection. Some sat quietly, staring at the planet on the holographic displays. Some rubbed their temples, exhausted from fear, calculations, and anticipation. And some simply leaned back, letting the reality sink in. Humanity had been humbled, and the universe had reminded them that they were far from the center of understanding. Outside, Earth continued its quiet rotation. Oceans moved, winds drifted, and cities carried on with daily life, unaware of the energy fields and pulses surrounding their home. The planet itself had become part of a dialogue humans could barely understand. And inside the Council, the most powerful minds on Earth realized that their greatest task was not to control, but to understand, adapt, and survive the observation of something far beyond comprehension. The fear was no longer just about destruction. It was about knowledge, perspective, and humility. Humanity had learned a painful truth. Power is fragile, control is fleeting, and the universe is far greater than any one species can grasp. And for the Council, that lesson was now unavoidable, relentless, and terrifying. The Council had been working tirelessly for days, and exhaustion was starting to weigh heavily on everyone. Sleep came in short, broken intervals, often interrupted by alarms or sudden shifts in readings. Yet despite fatigue, no one dared slow down. Humanity was facing something far beyond its understanding, and the Council knew that even a small mistake could have consequences they could not imagine. For hours, they observed the patterns of energy around Earth. They continued sending controlled pulses and signals, trying to respond to the intelligence that had moved the planet. The subtle heartbeat-like rhythm that had first alerted them had grown more pronounced. It was no longer just a passive observation. It was as if the planet itself was now alive in a way they had never experienced. At first, the Council thought it was a trick of instruments. But as days passed, it became undeniable. Earth itself was emitting faint, rhythmic vibrations, almost like a heartbeat, almost like a song. It was subtle, imperceptible to humans on the surface, but measurable with the sensitive instruments the Council controlled. A senior physicist examined the readings, his hands trembling slightly. "It's not just a field," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of machines. "The planet itself is responding. It's as if Earth has awareness." The words caused a pause in the room. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared at the scientist. Awareness? A planet? It seemed impossible. But the data didn't lie. Earth was behaving in ways that suggested it was actively responding to the pulses and signals they sent. The Council began to realize something extraordinary. Earth had been moved, observed, and now it was communicating not in words, but in vibrations and energy, in subtle responses that humanity could barely perceive. And these responses were deliberate. They were not random. They were structured. The realization filled the room with a strange mixture of awe and fear. Humans had always looked at the planet as their home, as something solid and predictable. But now they understood that the planet itself was part of a larger design, a force beyond their control, a participant in a cosmic observation. For the next several hours, the Council focused all attention on decoding these planetary signals. They recorded every pulse, every shift, every fluctuation. Teams worked in shifts, analyzing data, running simulations, and trying to anticipate the planet's responses. The process was exhausting, but no one could afford to stop. One analyst, staring at the readings for hours, noticed a repeating pattern. It wasn't a language humans could understand. It wasn't mathematical formulas. It was something else entirely, a pattern in the vibrations that suggested intentionality, rhythm, and order. "It's like it's teaching us something," he whispered, almost afraid of being wrong. The senior scientists exchanged uneasy glances. Teaching? Could a planet be teaching its inhabitants? Could the intelligence that had moved Earth be communicating through the planet itself, guiding humanity toward understanding, or warning them of something far greater? Meanwhile, outside the Council, small changes began to appear on Earth's surface. Tides became unusually calm in some regions, while elsewhere they shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. Forests appeared to have slight changes in growth patterns. Clouds moved differently. Even the air seemed to hum faintly in specific regions, though no one could explain why. The Council debated what it meant. Some argued that these changes were natural consequences of Earth's movement and the energy field surrounding it. Others believed it was deliberate, part of the intelligence's method of observation and communication. Whatever the cause, the evidence was clear. Earth was no longer entirely predictable. Humanity's understanding of the planet had been shattered. The young analyst who first noticed the planet's responses began to feel a strange connection to the data. He spent hours listening, watching, recording, and trying to interpret. At times, he imagined that the planet itself was alive, aware, and attempting to speak in a language humans could only sense but not fully comprehend. He shivered at the thought, both terrified and fascinated. Meanwhile, the Council began to experiment further. If Earth could respond to their pulses, perhaps they could learn more by sending increasingly complex sequences. Carefully, methodically, they designed patterns that mimicked natural planetary rhythms. They sent vibrations, energy pulses, and controlled electromagnetic signals into the field surrounding Earth. The responses came immediately. Slight changes in the planetary vibrations matched the pulses almost exactly, as if the planet were acknowledging them. The room erupted in quiet murmurs. Scientists and analysts leaned over screens, comparing readings, trying to understand. The planet was responding, but not randomly. Each response was deliberate, precise, and structured. A senior physicist spoke slowly, almost to himself. It's like Earth is alive in ways we never imagined. Not alive as we are, but aware, communicating, teaching, warning. The thought made everyone pause. Teaching? Warning? Were they being guided? Judged? Evaluated? The fear that had once been about loss of control now evolved into a deeper, more profound terror. Humanity might be on trial. Not by humans, not by any authority they had ever known, but by something or someone beyond comprehension. As the hours turned into days, the Council grew more skilled at interpreting the planetary signals. They noticed patterns corresponding to their own signals. Some pulses seemed to repeat specific sequences, as if encouraging the scientists to continue certain experiments. Other patterns were more complex, almost like questions being posed. Earth was responding, not just to presence, but to curiosity, observation, and intent. The realization sent chills through the Council. Earth was not just a home or a planet. It was now a participant in a dialogue, a living, responsive entity connected to an intelligence beyond human understanding. The planet itself had become part of a lesson in humility, awareness, and the fragility of human knowledge. Outside the Council, humanity remained largely unaware. Life went on as usual, though some people noticed subtle anomalies. Tides behaving strangely, satellite imagery appearing slightly distorted, weather patterns acting unpredictably. Scientists around the world tried to understand, but none had the full picture. Only the Council, with its network of sensors and instruments, could grasp the scale of what was happening. Within the Council, tension mixed with determination. Fear had not disappeared. It could never disappear, but understanding that Earth itself was responding offered a new sense of purpose. Humanity had always assumed it controlled the planet. Now, they realized the truth. They had a planet that was alive in a way they could barely perceive, and an intelligence observing, guiding, and testing them. The Council began to adjust their strategies. Instead of attempting direct control, they focused on observation, understanding, and careful communication. Every pulse, every signal, every experiment was measured. They documented responses meticulously, searching for patterns, hints, and clues. Every success, every small response from Earth, was celebrated quietly, as though the planet itself had offered a subtle acknowledgement. The young analyst spent long hours at the consoles, fascinated by the subtle, intricate dance of signals and vibrations. He often found himself alone in the control hall late at night, listening to the faint hum of instruments and the rhythmic pulses of Earth. It was both beautiful and terrifying. Humanity had always believed it understood its home planet, but now the planet itself was alive with intention, aware of its inhabitants, and participating in a dialogue far beyond comprehension. By the fifth day of constant observation, the Council began to notice something even more extraordinary. The planet's responses were not just mechanical or reactive, they seemed anticipatory. Certain experiments produced outcomes that suggested the intelligence guiding Earth could predict human actions, guide them, and shape the results deliberately. The Council realized that they were part of a lesson they did not fully understand, a lesson in humility. Awareness and the limits of human knowledge. Fear remained. Awe remained. But slowly, a new emotion began to emerge. Respect. Humanity had assumed mastery over the planet, but now they understood the truth. Earth was not just a place to inhabit. It was a living, responsive entity, connected to forces beyond comprehension. The Council recognized that survival now required observation, patience, and understanding, not power, not dominance. By the end of the 5th day, the Council had developed a new approach. Instead of trying to control Earth or force it to respond, they would continue to observe, study, and learn from its signals. They would attempt to interpret the pulses, understand the rhythms, and adapt humanity's actions accordingly. The planet itself had become a teacher, and humanity its student. Outside, life continued, unaware of the silent lesson unfolding. Earth rotated slowly, oceans swirled, and clouds drifted. Yet beneath the surface, subtle energies, rhythms, and vibrations connected the planet to forces far beyond human understanding. Humanity had been humbled. Their knowledge of the planet had been shattered. And the Council had learned an unshakable truth. The planet itself was alive, aware, and participating in a dialogue that would shape humanity's understanding of the universe. The Council had been watching, studying, and decoding for days. The planet had moved. The pulses had spoken. And now, slowly, ever so slowly, humanity began to grasp the meaning behind the silence. For the first time, the patterns in Earth's vibrations seemed to make sense. They were no longer random sequences or mysterious fluctuations. They were structured, deliberate, and surprisingly clear. Not in words humans could read, but in rhythm, sequence, and repetition. It was a language of energy, of motion, of understanding. The planet was communicating, and through it, the intelligence beyond comprehension was revealing its purpose. A senior scientist leaned back in his chair, exhaustion visible on his face, yet his eyes shone with realization. "It's a warning," he said softly. "Not of destruction, not of war, but of perspective. They're showing us what it means to be aware, to understand our place in the universe." The room fell silent. No one moved. The young analyst, who had spent countless hours staring at the rhythmic pulses, finally spoke. All this time, the movement, the energy, the signals, it wasn't to hurt us. It was to teach us, to make us see that we are small, that the universe is bigger, more powerful, and more intelligent than we can imagine. The Council listened carefully. They had feared destruction. They had feared powerlessness. They had feared the unknown. But now, fear took a different shape. It became awe mixed with humility, respect for forces beyond their control, and a deeper understanding of their own limitations. The pulses began to change subtly, almost as if the planet was responding to their comprehension. The rhythm shifted, slowed, then returned with a new sequence. It was almost musical in its elegance, like a teacher acknowledging a student's first correct answer. The energy was not threatening. It was deliberate, precise, and instructive. The senior scientist explained, "This is what fear truly means, not the fear of pain or destruction, but the fear of understanding how small we are. The fear of facing knowledge we cannot control. The fear of realizing that everything we believed about power and mastery is only part of a much bigger truth." A young analyst felt a chill. He had seen the pulses, felt their rhythm, and experienced the intelligence's observation. Now he understood that the Council's fear had been the right response. It was not terror in the ordinary sense. It was the deep, existential fear of realizing that humanity was not at the center of understanding, that the universe had its own rules, and that these rules could be far more complex than anyone could imagine. Outside the Council Hall, subtle changes on Earth mirrored the new understanding. Tides adjusted calmly, magnetic fields stabilized, and gravitational fluctuations softened. It was as if the planet itself was releasing tension, acknowledging humanity's growing comprehension. The observers, the intelligence that had moved Earth, were showing that they had noticed, and that humanity had begun to grasp its lesson. The Council began to reflect on what had been learned. Every movement of Earth, every pulse in the energy field, every subtle response had a purpose. Humanity had been tested not with force, but with awareness. The lesson was simple yet profound. Humans were fragile, their knowledge limited, and their control over their home planet an illusion. They had been forced to confront the truth of their own vulnerability, their own humility, and their place in the cosmos. As hours passed, the Council continued to monitor the signals. The energy pulses now seemed smoother, almost like a conversation, gentle yet undeniable. It was as if the intelligence guiding Earth was saying, "We have moved your world to show you perspective. We observe. We teach. We wait. Understand." The young analyst leaned forward, whispering to a colleague, "It's like we were children, and someone moved the playground to show us how the world really works. We weren't ready before, but now we're beginning to see." The senior scientist nodded slowly. "Yes, fear isn't about the unknown alone. It's about understanding the magnitude of what you do not control. And now humanity has faced it. We have seen the universe's scale, and it is humbling." Outside, as the day turned to night, life continued quietly. Oceans rippled, winds drifted, and clouds moved. Humans went about their routines, unaware that their planet had been moved and observed, and that their greatest fear had been the awakening of understanding. The world seemed unchanged, yet everything had shifted. Humanity had learned something fundamental, invisible to most, but life-changing for those who knew. In the council hall, the final realization settled in. The intelligence had not come to destroy, not to conquer, not to threaten. It had come to show perspective, to teach fear in its truest form, not the fear of pain, but the fear of knowing the universe was far greater than any single civilization. Humanity had faced that fear, survived, and begun to understand. For the first time, the young analyst allowed himself a deep breath. The pulses had slowed, the vibrations had eased, and the planet's subtle signals seemed calm. The intelligence had made its point. Humanity was not the center, but a small part of a vast, complex universe. They had been humbled. They had been tested. And now they had learned. The senior scientist addressed the council quietly, almost reverently. "We have faced something greater than ourselves, something that cannot be controlled, cannot be measured fully, and cannot be predicted. And yet we survived. We observed. We learned. And perhaps that is what truly matters." A silence followed, heavy yet peaceful. The fear that had gripped them for days had shifted. It was no longer raw, paralyzing terror. It was the fear of understanding, of seeing the universe's vastness, of knowing their limitations. It was profound, permanent, and humbling. Outside, Earth rotated silently in space, calm, steady, and alive in ways humans could now perceive, if not fully comprehend. The pulses continued faintly, a quiet acknowledgement from an intelligence that had moved the planet to teach a lesson. And within the council hall, humanity finally understood what it meant to truly fear, and to survive that fear with awareness. The council would never forget the experience. Every scientist, analyst, and leader would carry the memory of the movement, the pulses, and the realization of their fragility. Humanity had faced the unimaginable, had confronted an intelligence beyond comprehension, and had learned that true fear was not about destruction. It was about knowledge, perspective, and understanding one's place in the universe. As the first evening passed and quiet settled over the council, the young analyst looked at the planet on the main holographic display. Earth was still beautiful and infinitely more alive than he had ever imagined. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "We are small. We are fragile. But now, we know. The senior scientist placed a hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "And knowing is the beginning of wisdom." Fear teaches, and today we have learned what it truly means. The council continued to monitor Earth, but now with calm determination instead of panic. The observers had moved, had tested, had taught. Humanity had survived, learned, and grown in understanding. And for the first time, the council realized that fear, perspective, and humility were not weaknesses. They were lessons, guiding them toward a greater comprehension of the universe and the fragile, beautiful place within it. As night settled over the planet, the pulses slowed to a gentle, steady rhythm. The intelligence that had moved Earth had left its mark, not through destruction, but through awareness, perspective, and teaching. And humanity, for the first time, truly understood the power of what it meant to face the universe with eyes open and hearts humbled. The council members sat quietly, reflecting, exhausted but alive. Humanity had been tested, and humanity had survived. And in that survival, they had learned perhaps the greatest lesson of all, that fear, when understood, can be a teacher. Earth rotated silently, endlessly, gracefully in the vastness of space, alive, aware, and now understood in a way humanity had never imagined possible. And the council finally realized, sometimes, the greatest power in the universe is not to destroy, but to awaken understanding, to teach humility, and to show fear in its purest, most profound form.